prepared speaking Hebrew because the Bible says that Hebrew is the language of heaven. Because when God spoke to Paul on the road to Damascus, the Bible says he spoke to him in the Hebrew tongue. So you better start learning. For the last 50 years, without any planning on my part, one of my preoccupations, probably my chief preoccupation, has been finding ways to tell Jewish people about Jesus. Finding ways to tell all people about Jesus. And I want to talk to you about this morning because this is a very warm evangelical fellowship, and I'm sure that many of you are motivated to try and share your faith with other people. And yet I think some of the ways in which we've learned that we should share our faith don't work. Specifically what doesn't work is trying to convince somebody you're right and they're wrong. Doesn't work. Because really, when you try to prove your faith, it's like, look here, look here, look here. You're proving you're right and they're stupid. And they're wrong. And people don't want to be proven wrong, so they shut down. Is there another way? Now, this is with all due respect. I'm talking about the difference between what's called postmodernism and modernism. In modern thought, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, it really worked. If you could prove to somebody that something was true, they felt they had a deal with it. Nowadays, you prove to somebody something is true, and they say, so what? I'm not interested. It doesn't work for me. The Bible speaks about God as the true and living God. And sometimes it speaks of him as the living and true God. The true and living God, or the living and true God. I want to suggest that one of the things we need to learn to do, and I think it's a lot of fun. Let me tell you, sharing your faith should not be an ordeal. It should be fun. I'm going to show you how to be creative and fun. I think that rather than concentrate, I want you to kind of give me the benefit of the doubt. Rather than concentrate on proving that God is a true and living God, starting with truth, I want you to start with living. How do we demonstrate to people that God is a living God? I'm going to get to that. I'm going to tell you about 3 ways of sharing our faith. First, I want to talk to you about how Jesus talked, which is not the way we talk. Turn to John chapter 11. This is fascinating. I would not try to tell you anything. There's no benefit for me teaching you something that doesn't fascinate me. If it doesn't fascinate me, why should I bother you? This fascinates me. This famous chapter, Jesus had a friend named Lazarus, and who had 2 sisters. And Jesus and his disciples used to stop off there on occasion to be hosted by this family, and they were good friends. And then Jesus gets a message from one of the sisters, Lord, he whom you loved is ill. Now, it doesn't mean that he's got a cold. It means there's trouble. So let's look at this. A certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with anointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard that, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Stop. Notice the kind of enigmatic, poetic language that Jesus uses. Once you begin to notice this, you're going to find it fascinating in the Gospels. He doesn't say, he's not going to die, I'm going to raise him from the dead, everything's going to be fine. He doesn't say that. He speaks in much more veiled terms. I'll prove my point a little further. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was living. That's kind of ironic. He loved them, but instead of rushing to help them, you're a doctor. You love somebody, you hear they're sick. I love you so much, I'm not coming for 2 days. Notice the irony in this chapter. Jesus loved the brother, the sisters. So he stayed 2 more days where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, notice what he says. let us go to Judea. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews there was just now seeking to stone you. You're going there again? Jesus answered. Watch what he says. Are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. If anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. End quote. Now, I know what the disciples said to one another when he said, what is he talking about? You notice the language he uses? Now, I want you to pay attention to this because there's a lesson here for us, and I'm going to show you what the lesson is. I just love this stuff. Again, imagine you say, somebody says to you, why are you going back over to the west side of Pasadena, further west? Weren't they trying to kill you there the other day on that street that you're going? You're going down to Fair Oaks. You're going down to Fair Oaks in Washington. They were trying to kill you there the other day. And then you say to him, well, look, Chucky, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. If anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Why does Jesus talk this way? I'm going to explain to you why, but it's important. The disciples said to him, and after the saying these things, he does it again. He says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, they don't get it. They said, boy, if he's fallen asleep, he's going to wake up. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. Now, I love that verse 14. Because when the text says, then he told them plainly, it means that before, he was not talking plainly. And his normal habit is not to talk plainly. Why? There is a great Jewish author, a rabbi, a great scholar in the 20th century named Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a tremendous man of God, unbelievable person. And he wrote extraordinary books in 5 languages. He wrote as well in German and in Yiddish and in Hebrew and in Polish and in English. He wrote better in all of those languages than I write in any language. But he chose to write poetically, like Jesus chooses to speak poetically, and he told us why. He says, because when people read poetry, their instinct is to stop and say, what does this mean? You see that? That's the reflex. Very often when we witness to people, this is an important lesson. If you don't get anything out of it, at least I do. So one of us benefits. Very often when we speak to people about the faith, we lay it all out for them. We kind of give them evidence, we give them proofs and all that jazz. But they're defended against that. They don't enter into it. They keep it at arm's distance. But when you tell people things in this kind of poetic language or use metaphors, people say, I wonder what he meant by that. I wonder what he even meant by that. I just want to give you a little assignment. Think about a person you know who you've been trying to share the faith with, or who you wish you could share the faith with. Think about their life. Think about what is important to them, what rings their chimes, what they're really invested in. If they really love their children, if they're really dedicated to helping people, if they love the Los Angeles Dodgers, I don't care what it is. And then think of a metaphor from that world that you can use to convey spiritual truth. Let's say you have a friend who really loves her children. She's got 3 children. Father's not around, but everybody knows she loves her children. You say to her, you really love your children, don't you, Rosie? You know I love my children. You do anything for your children, wouldn't you, Rosie? She said, yeah. I said, would you give your life to save your children's lives? She said, you bet. That's what God did. He loved us so much, like a parent loves his children, that he gave his life. So when you don't understand what I believe, see that? You use it now. Maybe you could do it even better and just say, okay, we just talked about your children. What do you think that has to do with what I have to say to you about God? Let them figure it out. But the point is, using a metaphor, a comparison from their world for you to get them to think. I want to look at one more passage. I was supposed to have 6 hours today, but I've gotten getting less. Turn to Luke chapter 7. So the first thing I'm telling you is you need to learn to speak in ways where people have to figure out what you mean. Because if they have to figure it out, then they enter into it. If they don't have to figure it out, they just kind of look at it from afar and they back away. Luke chapter 7. For all I know, this may be the woman, this may be, we read it in John 11. In John 11 we read that there was this Mary who wiped Jesus' feet with her hair. This may be the same woman. In Luke chapter 7. Now, this is a hot story. I'm beginning in verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, which is a big deal. When you ask somebody to eat with you in that culture, it means it implies acceptance. He asked him to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. She was the town tramp. Everybody knew. When it says she was a sinner, it's talking about the fact that she was a person who had a bad sexual reputation. A woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. That's expensive stuff. Standing behind him at his feet, because we realize that Jesus ate like many people in the world eat, like people in India eat. There's a dish in the middle, and I remember being in a seminary in India, all these nice PhDs. I looked at your wedding pictures. Yeah, I was going to preach about your wedding pictures, because I see two plates with forks on them. You know, honey, let's not eat like we eat in India. You'll frighten the Westerners. In India, they don't eat that way. In India, you eat with your hand. We read about Jesus dipping his hand into the dish. So there's dishes in the middle, and everybody is around it like spokes of a wheel. They're all leaning on an elbow and reaching into the dish. So while Jesus is lying down with his feet behind him, eating from the dish, this woman comes. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. You got to realize how extremely intimate that is. In the Middle East, the hair is considered to be very, very personal. This is why, for instance, Muslim women keep their hair covered, because only their husbands should see their hair. Orthodox Jewish women, the same thing. Many Orthodox Jewish women cut their hair short, and they wear wigs, gorgeous wigs. You'd never know they were wigs. But they only wear wigs in public. Not for cosmetic reasons, but because in their tradition, it's not decent for me to show other men my hair. Only my husband. So here she is. The village tramp is kissing his feet, washing them with her tears, and wiping them with her hair. Very intimate. Well, Simon the Pharisee stands off on the side, and he says, "That's okay, I'll come back." Simon the Pharisee stands off on the side. He said, if this guy was really a prophet, he would know what kind of efflusion this is who's doing this to him. So, some prophet, you know. Now, this demonstrates that Simon, although he had invited him to the house, he invited him so he could check him out, you know. Now, Jesus says, I have something to say to you, Simon. Now, most of us, if we had something to say to him, we'd say something like, you know, what are you giving me a hard time for? What are you giving her a hard time for? We go to him straight. But Jesus doesn't do that. What does he do? He says, verse 40. Simon had something to say to you. He said, say it, teacher. And Jesus tells him a story. Now this makes sense in much of the world. In the West, it doesn't make sense. He says, a certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they both could not pay, he canceled the debt of both of them. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon said, well, I suppose the one for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said, you have judged rightly. He tells him the story so that Simon could first get the principle, even though he doesn't realize it applies to him. Nathan the prophet does the same thing with David. When David commits adultery with Bathsheba, and then he has Bathsheba's husband killed because she turns up pregnant, he sends him off to the battle and he says, put this guy in the front of the battle lines and everybody withdraw from him. So he get killed. He's a nice guy. This is a sweet guy, Uriah. And David has him killed. So Nathan comes to confront him. And he does the same thing. He's got a story to tell. It talks about a man who had one little lamb. You know, and he loved the lamb very much. And then another man who had all the sheep that he wanted, he decided he wanted the lamb and he had the man killed. And David said, that man should be punished, should be executed. Then Nathan says, you're the man. It's not powerful. But first, he gets him to see the point in the story rather than talking about himself. So then he says, look. He turned toward the woman and said, Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. She has wet my feet with her tears. She wiped them with her hair. In other words, you, Mr. Big Shot religious guy, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to treat me with honor like you treat anybody with honor who comes into your house. You didn't bother washing my feet, anointing me. You didn't kiss me when I came in, which was the typical thing you do for a house guest. You had no manners. This woman who you despise, she went overboard to show me honor. Verse 47, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he was forgiven little, loved much. So I have to stop there because my time is up. I want to draw a conclusion for you. When you share your faith with people, I want you to resist the urge to lay it out. I want you to think of talking in terms of comparing your faith, your encounter with God, in metaphors that they can understand, number one. Compare it to something that they get. Number two, when you're trying to make a point to somebody, tell them a story. People love stories. It's a great Jewish author named Elie Wiesel. He said, God created people because he loves stories. It's great. People love stories. Tell them stories. Let them get the point of the story. Then you make the application of the story to the point you wanted to make. I hope I helped you today. I wish I had more time. In case you can't guess, I love to teach. Thank you very much. Shalom.
Well, thank you very much. I was hoping that